doing, Shyamala? Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Feel like we haven't spoke for a while, but things are going well. It looks like, NVIDIA now. NVIDIA is doing some very interesting stuff, and I think Harsh kind of introduced you a little bit there, but maybe it might be helpful because a lot of people who maybe is tuning in might not be quite aware of NVIDIA's conversational AI capabilities. So maybe it might be nice to hear a little bit about yourself first of all, because I know you were at Ford for a while. You're working on some interesting stuff there. So it'd be nice to hear a little bit about yourself, but also what NVIDIA is doing as it relates to providing conversational AI capabilities.
Yeah, definitely. So a little bit about myself. I have almost like 22 years of experience, and 10 years of experience has been purely in the conversational AI space. I've done some interesting work during my tenure with Amazon on Alexa, and then moved on to Ford, where I led the autonomous digital assistant and some of the conversational AI work there. All the vehicles like F-150 Mach-E, which has the Sync 4 voice assistant, was the product I worked on. And in the autonomous also, there were some interesting use cases I was working on. And at NVIDIA, I'm a product manager for conversational AI and deep learning. So not many people know that NVIDIA is not just a GPU company, but they are more than that. They have conversational AI capabilities. We call it speech AI. We solely work on the speech recognition technology and the text-to-speech technologies. So on the speech recognition side, of course, working on different languages, but we also work on different kind of capabilities to enhance the speech recognition, like speaker diarization, word boosting, and all of those kind of things. But in addition to that, we are also working on text-to-speech as well. And on the text-to-speech side, it was interesting to see Ariv's presentation because we are working on something similar. And one of my product is using 30 minutes of your audio data, you can create a production quality synthetic voice. And everything is like easy to use. We provide you the entire interface end to end to do not just the recording, but the pre-processing and training and everything. But we also have the out-of-the-box text-to-speech voices in different languages. We're also working on a huge element of the natural language processing and natural language understanding as well. And we call it like the big NLP, which focuses on enhancing these capabilities. We also have tools for bot making and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty much we are trying to cover almost all aspects of conversational AI, and we call it Riva, and it went in production recently and was announced in GTC.
Yeah, I saw that. It was caught me by surprise a little bit as well, because obviously NVIDIA has immense GPU capabilities, and obviously one of the things that's required to run all of these machine learning models is decent processors. So it kind of makes sense when you think about it like that NVIDIA was probably powering a lot of the servers and computing for many of the big companies who are building out these services anyway. So why not kind of do this stuff yourself,
Yeah, totally. And NVIDIA has a huge AI and machine learning capabilities, a lot of researchers and data scientists and people experimenting with different kind of mix and match. So definitely it made sense. And especially with edge computing picking up and, on the edge picking up, it does make sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be interested. I didn't realize that you had custom synthetic voices able to be trained with 30 minutes of data. That's actually impressive. I might have a need for that coming up actually, so I'll check that out myself. Yeah, nice one. So obviously, I've seen some videos of Riva and it looks pretty impressive. I was actually at a conference where I forget the person's name now, but there was a presentation from somebody at NVIDIA talking about the level of customization that you can get when you actually use this technology. Probably maybe it's too much of a technical discussion to get in for today, but what I can probably say is that it gives you a great amount of control if you do have the expertise to dive under the hood of this kind of technology. But the examples that you see that people might be familiar with that have been kind of, public examples of where this technology can be applied has been in, I suppose, areas where people are familiar with, but areas that show just the kind of breadth of voice AI capabilities, certainly, and also conversational AI. So things like in vehicles, in kind of like infotainment systems and stuff like that. And interestingly, the video I saw was where it was using gaze detection as the wake word as opposed to a wake word,
Yeah.
actual wake word, which is interesting. And so, given that, a lot of people will be tuning in. I don't know what level of maturity they're at. They may be at the very beginning of the journey. They may be kind of quite sophisticated and mature as far as what they've deployed conversational AI wise. But obviously, there is so much opportunity to apply this technology. You've got in vehicles, you've got kind of like on devices. We've all seen the voice assistants and customized voice assistants. You've got in app, you've got on websites, you've got call center use cases, you've got website chat use cases, you've got SMS and RCS messaging use cases, you've got social media messaging use cases. The list just kind of goes on, basically. Email use cases as well. And so it can all be quite overwhelming, and it can all be fairly hard to wrap your head around for an organization or an individual trying to figure out where to start. So I wonder whether we could get into what your thoughts are on some of the kind of key elements to thinking about how to approach utilizing conversational AI as part of your business strategy.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And so, in terms of the strategy itself, some of the companies who are picking up conversational AI is they're just trying to follow the crowd. Like, oh, conversational AI is picking up, I need to catch up. It's like how companies were trying to get into mobile world without knowing why they want it. So the most important thing I feel in terms of the conversational AI strategy is knowing like what problem it is going to solve, like what business value proposition will you get out of that, right? So for example, do you just want to have a conversational AI because it's picking up and you don't want to be the laggard in, or do you really want to solve for a problem? For example, when we were working in the conversational AI space in the vehicle, it made total sense to start thinking about it like, yes, eyes free, hands free kind of experience. So voice made sense, like if I want to call someone or if I want to navigate to a certain place, instead of typing and getting distracted and killing 10 and other people, it made more sense to start thinking about having a voice strategy, right? But that is just one part of it, like having a clear value proposition, like why you want to have a conversational AI strategy is important. But at the same time, it's also important, like what kind of technology capabilities do you need? Do you need customization? So for example, I'm seeing a lot of companies using conversational AI in the customer care world, because yes, there's a problem to solve. There are so many people who are actually not like the virtual assistants, but there are people who are actually talking to these customers, and there's a huge backlog and wait time. That problem can be solved with conversational AI. So that is the kind of value proposition you have to look for. Like what problem is it solving that currently your technology or capability is not able to? The second thing is you need to start thinking about all the different elements which make up the conversational AI, right? So for example, do you want to have a persona for that? Like, do you just want a random assistant, or do you want to have a persona? You have to then start thinking about your bot strategy, like what is the bot persona, what kind of elements do I put so it also aligns with my branding. But you also have to start thinking about the capabilities, like what platform would you use to build it? There are so many providers available out there. Even for the text to speech, there are so many competing companies, and for the speech recognition technology, there are competing companies. So why would you want to go to a certain, for example, you mentioned NVIDIA is working on so many customizations. Yeah, if you are looking for those kind of capabilities where you can customize end-to-end pipeline of your speech recognition, and you can add as many elements to it as you want, we are just giving you the base, then using a technology like that would totally make sense, right? But also looking at what kind of bot maker platform would you want to use. Is it compatible with your technologies? Because not all providers might be providing you everything. You may decide like, I want to use uh, NVIDIA speech recognition technology and text to speech technology, and I would want to go to voice flow to build my conversational AI. Do they have the mapping or interaction capabilities? Like, are they able to integrate together well? So those kind of integrations also you would have to think about, right? You also have to think about the scalability aspect of it. How many languages do you want this thing? And does the provider provide you those languages or not? But also scaling, like if I have to add integration to Salesforce, or if I have to add integration to additional elements so that I know the users preferences, or I know the user's requirements. So when the user comes, I can say like, hey Kane, how are you doing? Not just like that, but also, knowing your preferences from our previous conversations and picking up from there, making it more emotive. So companies have started doing these kind of things. So it really makes sense to start thinking about all of these kind of elements, like the design, the copy, the value proposition, the technology, the tool you will be using. And the most important thing I would say is, while we are doing all of these things, is how are you going to handle the privacy aspect? You are collecting so much information and you know so much about the users. So how are you going to collect or control the privacy aspect as well? So these are really important things to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I think the first part there around trying to make sure that you're solving a real problem, I think is a really interesting one, because there is definitely similarities I'm seeing with social media. We just got to get a Facebook page, quick build one. We need a Twitter handle, and then all of a sudden it's like, it escalates from there. But I think that another part that kind of businesses can oversee, because of the fact that they don't start with the end in mind, basically, which is what are we trying to solve for, is that measuring the success of it is actually quite difficult. A lot of questions that I'll ask is how are you measuring the success of your program? And it's surprising the kind of answers that you get, because a lot in the customer service use cases that you mentioned there, in order to save actual money, in order to save cashable money that you can say, I've saved this actual money, you either need to sack people, or you need to do something that's going to release the funds, stop paying for certain software licenses or whatever. And so I always feel as though the cashable part is almost a red herring, and that a lot of the value comes from the customer experience benefits, the scalability benefits, as you mentioned. If you're a growing business or you can't recruit, being able to manage call demand without needing to recruit your workforce or scale your workforce, there's all kinds of benefits that can be had and found, but you need to be able to start with what actual problem are you trying to solve. And I think that's kind of where a lot of companies kind of step up, because they don't really know what they're measuring when they're trying to do this stuff,
Definitely. I've seen that happening so much, because yeah, companies want to just get into the norm like everyone is doing, right? But value proposition is the most important thing to think about. Now, talking about the measuring aspect of it, there's so many things, like uh, measuring is not always in terms of the money. Money is an important aspect to start measuring, but the other aspects to measure is, okay, if you look at it from the customer care world, there are agents who are actually taking the calls. When I say agents, I'm talking about real humans who are taking the call. And an average wait time, I had an opportunity while at Amazon to actually go to the customer care and do some sort of field studies, where I was sitting with these agents and listening to them taking the calls and understand that side of the world. And what I saw was, well, people are waiting for minutes before they can get someone to talk to them. That's where, if there's an IVR system, or if there is a bot who can actually converse like a human, you are reducing that wait time and frustration the user might have. That is again a very important metrics to measure, like how does the satisfaction rise or decline, right? But also how long did the user had to wait on an average in before they were actually helped. That also is going to help with the brand, like, yes, oh wow, it's great, like I was able to get help in like 5 minutes, and or within 2 minutes, or my issue got sorted in X minutes. So that also is an important metrics, right? But again, adoption, like how many people are using it. Like you have the option to press 0 and say like, I want to talk to an agent, right? So do you always press 0 because you don't want to go through the virtual assistant route? So knowing those kind of metrics also helps, and these are really the key success elements, I would say.
Absolutely. There's also some more difficult to measure things, which are not necessarily the kind of like quantitative stuff, which is the kind of strategic ROI that you get. Like, for example, if I was to look at someone like a company like Capital One, and you look at their assistant, the strategic leverage they now have because of having that digital assistant across all of their properties, the data that they're able to gather, how they can utilize that in order to improve their products and services, not just the assistant, but broadly speaking, their products and services. There's a strategic ROI, I think, that you can get as well, which I think a lot overlook. And the second thing, which is also a bit difficult to measure, which we'll come on to a little bit, is that you also need to measure your maturity ROI, which is that as a team, as a business, how are you developing the internal capabilities and knowledge and skills to be able to properly manage and scale this kind of stuff? It's one thing to employ a conversation designer. It's a whole other thing, as you'll know, working at NVIDIA, to have an actual full team of people that are responsible for managing, maintaining, and improving and scaling these kind of models and these use cases. And so the kind of maturity ROI, I think, is often overlooked as well. But talking about the teams that are needed, I mean, we had on the podcast last night, we had Hirun Das from ABN AMRO Bank, and he was talking about their journey, and they've been doing, it's a Dutch bank, fairly large bank, and they've been kind of investing in their chatbot for nearly 5 years now. And they've got a team of 40, there's conversation designers, machine learning engineers, data scientists, and a whole lot. But not everyone starts there. So I'm wondering if whether you can shed some light on your thoughts on what is a kind of like a core team look like? What are the crucial skills that without you will really struggle to do this?
Yeah, I've experienced that personally when I was with Ford. Right, I was the only conversational designer there. So I would say the core team who needs to be part of this is you definitely need to have a product manager who's defining the vision for it, because without the product manager, it's not going to work out. The person is going to think about what is the strategy. They are going to think about the use cases. They are going to think about the roadmap. And that is where the scalability aspect and everything will come into play. So having a product manager is important. But at the same time, having a conversational designer can help with the designing aspect of things, right? They can help with, okay, how do I design the conversation? Like what kind of bot personality do I design? Or how do I design the copy? Do I have to create some sort of standard element so that it is consistent across? So, and also designing the entire conversational interaction, which we call VUIs. So conversational designer is required to do those kind of things. But then we also need, at least my experience have been, you need a data scientist for sure. Because well, you're not going to take the solution as is and then say like, okay, I'm done. So when I was working at Ford, we were using Serensis technology. So out of the box, they gave the speech recognition capabilities. They gave us the text to speech capabilities. We were using the out of box voice, and we were using whatever capabilities they had. But then we had to do some customizations on the speech recognition side so that it can understand some of the terminologies from the vehicle context. Right? For example, the address itself from the navigation, we had to work with the nav provider, and we were using here. So the nav provider would give the address and all, but the speech recognition should be able to understand. For example, in the United States, if you have to give an address, it's very simple. You would have the street name, and then you would have the city, and then you would have the country and zip code. That's it. But if you have to think about the address in India, it's like very complicated. It would have like, okay, house number 45 and all of that, street number, road number, all of those fancy jazz, but also would have things like behind Key Bank or behind ICICI or something like that. If you look at other countries, it might be completely different. It may start with the country. So if you are trying to say like, okay, I want to go to XYZ address, it might change completely from country to country. So the ASR should be able to understand all of those different terminologies, like where it started from. The natural language should be able to pick it up and say like, okay, you want to go to this address, and then being able to respond back to you. So it's not just like you can take an out of the box solution from a vendor and say like, I'm done, I don't have to do anything on my end. There is requirement for you to start fixing some of those problems so that it is more customizable for your needs. And in those kind of things, you might need a data scientist who can work and train the system alongside these companies, because they will not have that kind of capabilities. But companies do provide white glove services. So if you do not have a data scientist, yeah, they can do some of those additional services for you. at additional cost. So companies are trying to do, but at core, if you want to do, you need to have a data scientist. You also need to have a developer who can integrate all of these things, like person who understands conversational AI, person who understands how you have to integrate these capabilities. And again, it also depends on the context, right? Like, for example, when we were trying to integrate Alexa for Ford, one of the thing was like deploying the entire SDK into the vehicle. That was important. But at the same time, making sure it also works with the elements of the vehicle. So there are like those kind of capabilities. A software engineer who's already working on the vehicle side of things would be able to pick those things. And if it is an API, being able to connect to those APIs and then test it out. So at a minimum, you need at least these people, but you also need a researcher. And I may have a bias here coming from a UX design background, but having a researcher is very, very important, because you're not just going to design something and publish it out there. You may want to constantly keep researching on the usability of it. You may want to keep checking on like the needs of the users. For example, when I was working in the autonomous strategy, first of all, the question I had was, do people or will people use an assistant in an autonomous use case? Like, you have an autonomous vehicle, will people use a voice assistant, and for what? So I had the researcher who helped me map out the entire research. We did a co-creation, we simulated the experience, we actually had a prototype of the vehicles where people can sit and do all of those things. Not everyone is capable of doing and running research well, but those kind of things are also needed at the bare minimum. Throughout different phases, you may need research. Once your conversation is done, you may want to test out the conversation to see if there are gaps and how do you fix those gaps. There might be cases like, once you have launched, you may also want to constantly keep researching with the users to understand how to fix what next and all. So researcher needs to work hand in hand. If a product manager can do all of it, fine, but I don't prefer having jack of all trade. So at bare minimum, these are the 4 people you need to have for sure. Adding more capabilities again depends on how mature your company is, how tech capable your company is, and also your strategy. Like, do you want to become like Ford has a clear value proposition, but I was also clear, like, we are an automotive company and we want to stay an automotive company, right? We don't want to become a technology company. And that is why they had clear direction on why they wanted to have certain roles.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I think, yeah, that's really useful. I think anyone getting started, product manager, conversation designer, data scientist, developer, researcher, over time you might want to develop, I mean, depending on how far you get down the road. I mean, I'm a big believer that the conversation on the front end can and should drive business process changes on the back end. And therefore, when you start to mature and you go beyond the kind of Q&A use cases and you start getting into actual process automation, you may want business analysts and that kind of stuff in there. And obviously AI trainers who maybe a user researcher with a data scientist together perhaps can do that stuff. But I'm seeing a lot of bespoke roles being created around AI training, NLU management and stuff like that. But I think those core ones are absolutely spot on.
Yeah, definitely. Now, again, depending on the company, right? Like, depending on the company, you may have the AI trainer. Not every company will have that kind of, for example, the engineering team itself. When I was at Ford, we had this huge language or capabilities we wanted to create. For example, in the vehicle, the user can say, what is the weather? Weather has been like referred a couple of times. Let me say this, I'm feeling hot. What does that actually mean when you say like, I'm feeling hot? Do you mean like, should I turn on the AC? To what temperature, right? So, or if I say like, it's really humid out here, what does that mean? Is the user saying turn on the AC? Right? So for those kind of capabilities, you need to have a natural language piece which has to be built. So I was the one who collected all of those utterances by doing some research and stuffs, because we had no other way to collect those. So we looked at what kind of things people are asking for. We also collected a lot of utterances through different kind of creative ways. Once we had those things, our engineering team worked with the vendors for the model training piece, which is pretty simple. Like, okay, you need to train this NLU. and then they work. So not always you would need an AI trainer dedicatedly to do this thing. If you are working on a very small use case, if you have like a lot of use cases where customization is required, then probably yes. But what I have seen is AI trainer is going to get redundant if your use cases are not like once I have built those things, like I've added the utterances which the users can understand, the system can understand and map an intent to what's next.
Mm.
What am I going to do after that? Right?
Yeah.
There are only a certain kind of utterances. There may be one or two additional, but it's not something which is an ongoing demand kind of thing, versus a conversational designer who might have a constant need of creating new conversations, but again coming back and fixing old conversations, seeing those gaps during the actual production interactions. So some of the roles, companies will look at these kind of things, like, is this a role which is scalable? Is this something which is required for the long term? If not, I don't think companies are going to invest just because there's something of their sort. So they might try to mix and match, like, okay, hey developer, why don't you learn how to do this thing and work on it, because it's part of the pipeline what you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Spot on. Cool. Well, Shyamala, this has been absolutely fantastic. We're up on time. I would definitely recommend those of you tuning in to go and check out NVIDIA's capabilities. It is definitely well recommended. I myself am going to go and have a look at that customized TTS after this. Just search for NVIDIA Riva and you'll find all of the stuff. I would also advise following Shyamala on LinkedIn and various channels, because you do post quite a lot of content and you've got some really good insights that you regularly share. So I definitely recommend that. And if you're interested in this kind of discussion that we're having, these kind of discussions is what I do every single week, twice a week on the VUX World podcast. So go to vux.world/podcast or /subscribe if you want to get invites to all of these webinars, all of these podcasts, and all that kind of stuff that we do in future. And we'll wrap it up there. Harsh, back to you, mate.
Thank you, Kane.
Cheers.